Okay, we'll get started this evening, and I'm sure folks will be joining as we give introductions, but wanted to make sure we're honoring folks' time and moving forward this evening. Again, my name is Jenna Troget. With Kearns and West, I'll be the facilitator for this evening's virtual workshop. Want to welcome folks. We can go to the next slide. I'll give a brief overview of the Zoom platform. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Zoom, and over the last year and a half have done many meetings or family gatherings with Zoom, but I wanted to walk through some of the features of the Zoom platform for tonight's workshop. The bottom left-hand corner, you'll find your audio settings. I have oftentimes have the Zoom platform call my phone just to work through bandwidth. So if you're having bandwidth issues, you can click on that. You can have your video on or off this evening. Clicking on the Participants tab in the middle of the taskbar at the bottom of your screen, you can see who's joining us tonight. We'll be doing some questions and answers through the chat pod, and any technical assistance you need, you can find there as well. The reactions button at the bottom of your screen might be a setting that you have. You can send reactions. The top of your screen, there's view options. I like to click on view side-by-side mode. It puts the presentation in the middle, the videos on the side, and that's what's shown on the screen. If you go to the next slide, we have this guide for productive workshop. We are so excited and happy that everyone can join us this evening. We had such robust participation at the first virtual workshop we had for the Oso Creek Golf Course and Public Space Workshop that we wanted to make sure folks could join again. We will be having in-person engagement through the Planning Commission and City Council meetings, but wanted to make sure that we had this virtual workshop for you all this evening. And we want to make sure that you can actively participate. We welcome your input as part of the process. We ask that you be respectful and listen for understanding. Sharing your ideas with room for others, that there's a respect for differences, but that you have fun. We have some interesting things to talk about tonight. So I'm looking forward to having fun and reviewing part of this draft plan here and hearing your perspectives. As a reminder, this workshop is being recorded and will be posted to view afterward as well. If you go to the next slide. I'll walk through tonight's agenda. So we are in the middle of welcome and introductions. I see a lot of people joining as we're giving these welcome and introductions. Again, we're glad you're here this evening. Then we'll review, we'll have three parts tonight. We'll have part one, what we've heard and some guiding principles. Part two, the short-term 6-year action plan. Part three, the long-term ideas and beyond. And then we'll talk about next steps. We can go to the next slide. I will turn it over to Larry to give a welcome and introductions from city staff and the project team. Larry, take it away.
Thanks, Jenna. Welcome, everybody. My name is Larry Longnicker. I'm the city's Planning and Economic Development Manager. And on behalf of staff, we want to welcome you to this second workshop for the golf course and public space vision plan. I wanted to note we have several folks from staff in the workshop tonight that have been working very closely with the consultant in preparation of the vision plan that we're going to go over this evening. Our city manager, Dennis Wilberg, is on the call. Our assistant city manager, Keith Rattay, director of community development, Elaine Lister, and director of community relations, Robert Schick. We also have, I noticed, several of the city's commissioners. I'd like to welcome you to the workshop, and our entire city council is on the call as well. So we have Mayor Trish Kelly, Mayor Pro Tem Wendy Bucknam, and Council Member Greg Raths. And then our other two commissioners are also our Economic Development Committee members. They've been working very closely with staff and with the consultant on this effort, and they were going to make some introductory comments. So I'll turn over to Council Member Ed Sachs to make some comments.
Thanks, Larry. I appreciate it. I just want everyone to understand that when the city went out and purchased this property, and by the way, we paid cash for the property, so we have no debt. It's more than just the golf course. I'd like to congratulate the work that's been done on the golf course and the record amount of time, I believe, and as well the food services that are being provided. But tonight I want everyone to understand and get a grasp at the other acreage that's out there and what we want to do. We didn't make this purchase again just for the golf course. We made it for the entire open space of over 100 acres. And I'm going to be listening to what the community has to say. This is our second meeting to discuss this, and I'm excited to hear what the community has to say about it. Thanks, Larry.
Great, thanks, Ed. And then also Council Member Brian Goodell, our second member of the Economic Development Committee. Brian, did you want to say an introductory statement?
Yeah, I think Ed said what Ed said was great, and I'm excited about that. We're at this point and getting coming out to the community to get additional input. I hope everyone will have an open mind to what's presented tonight and give it some good thought. You know, as Ed said, we bought this property not just for the golf course, but for the 103 or 108 acres. Now I forget exactly the total amount, but it was slightly over 100 acres. But not only is that important, but also the fact that the city owns other properties immediately adjacent to this. We own the tennis center, we own the aquatic center, the Marguerite Aquatic Center, and we own the property that the YMCA sits on. Plus, we have another 5 acres that the city already owns adjacent to the aquatic center and the parking lot there. So it's a much bigger overall picture as the heart of our city, right in the middle of our city, if you will, and that it has so many recreational opportunities for beautiful amenities that will serve the people of our city and our region for decades to come and for generations to come. So keep that in mind as you ponder the ideas presented and react or respond to them, and try to take in the bigger picture of the overall scheme of what we're trying to do here. And I'm very excited. I see we have almost 70 people online, including our staff but also many members of the public. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you all have to say and what you think of what's been produced so far. Thank you.
Great, thank you both. So with that, I'll throw it back over to the MR Pro Fund team. Jim, if you want to take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, Larry. I just want to make sure I was unmuted. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jim Higashi with MR Pro Fund. We are the lead consultant for the vision plan. I'm joined by 2 of our staff members, Dave Schmidt and John McDonald, and also our other consultants, Jenna and Chris, and then with the Kearns and West. And then we have Gaurav and Kathy from Dudek, our urban planners, and some other staff members or team members that aren't on the call include Performa Advisors, our economic advisors, and Cal Olson, who's also our landscape architect. But we've been thrilled to work on this project and went through an extensive process over the last 11 months and are getting closer to providing our final vision plan. But we look forward to, we've had a few outreach programs with various stakeholders and community members, and we look forward to hearing from you. So with that, I'm going to return it back over to Jenna.
Thank you, Jim, for that introduction. And thank you, Larry and council members, for giving those great opening remarks. I also want to acknowledge, as others did, how many folks are on the call this evening. And we want to hear from you too. You're an important part of this workshop. So what I would say is, in the chat pod, if you would like to add your name, your neighborhood, and your favorite activity to do with your family. And I'll add your favorite activity to do with your family this summer. So your favorite summer activity to do with your family. And I'll watch the chat, and I'm going to read a couple out loud as well. So your name, your neighborhood, and your favorite summer activity to do with your family. And this will give us just a good insight and for others to see who else is on the call and on the webinar with us this evening. All right, I see Judy has joined us. See Victoria enjoys concerts at Lake Mission Viejo. Barbecue and summer concerts in Mission Viejo. So great summer activities to do with your family. Walking the creek trails, playing golf, enjoying food services now that there's food services available at Oso Creek. Pickleball. Folks enjoying biking and walking and running in the city. Folks joining us who live adjacent to the golf course and public space area, enjoying traveling and nature walks, looking at the Oso Creek Golf Course, people hiking, seeing a lot of hiking, a lot of walking, a lot of outdoor activities, enjoying the public space in Mission Viejo. Someone noting that these aren't just summer activities, but these can be year-round activities because of the services that the city provides and the public space available to folks. Other people walking their dog, going to the park with kids, riding their bike on Oso Creek Trail. All right. Well, thank you all for sharing. We can keep it going in the chat, and we'll have that as well. I see another person loving to going to concerts in the park. All right, well, let's head to the next slide. So we are here this evening to provide you all with information about the process to date and to share short and long-term ideas for not just the golf course, but for the public space as well. We want to gather your feedback and perspectives, and we want to share what future input opportunities and what the project schedule will look like. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gaurav to share more information about the project and to dive a little deeper. So Gaurav is going to share a lot of information, but we're going to have it broken up with introduction, with discussion. And we can have some interaction in the chat as well. So be ready as you're thinking about different questions. We'll be able to pause for those. And Gaurav, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jenna. Good evening, everyone. My name is Gaurav Srivastava. I am an urban planner with DUDEC, and I'm helping the consultant team and city staff develop the vision plan for this area. So just to add to what Jenna said, one of the things we want to do today is to update you on the progress of our work since we last met in March. We previously shared ideas that had to do primarily with short-term improvements. We are back this evening to share refinements of those short-term ideas and also to share some initial concepts for long-term improvements. Before we start, I wanted to clarify that this is a visioning process. So all the ideas that we will share with you today and receive your feedback are not actual development proposals. We are still far from detailed design. The purpose for today's discussion is really to hear your input on the range of ideas that we will be sharing with you. So make sure you convey to us what appeals to you, what does not. If there are any additional ideas that you would like us to consider, now is the time to do so. With that, let me first provide you a summary of what it is that we've heard from stakeholders in the community to date. So we've had stakeholder meetings, and we also had that first workshop, and a few things stood out. Clearly, there is great interest in the golf course and in its improving its operations, its safety, and the amenities that are available there. Extending on that, the desire to have more food and drink options as well as hospitality in this area. We also heard clearly the need and expectation for additional community event space. Parking was highlighted to us as an issue that needs addressing, especially on days that are busy, that have events at the rec facility. And finally, the broad desire to enhance the existing trail and provide a broader range of recreational amenities. With that input, we've crafted a set of preliminary guiding principles, and everything that you see today has really been shaped by these principles. So they're listed on the screen, but I just want to point out a few. We recognize the role and identity that the city of Mission Viejo has in the region, and we would like to build off that identity and reputation to provide amenities and facilities that really supplement that identity. We want to look at Oso Creek Trail, which is already a primary recreational spine in the city, and ensure that it provides a diversity of recreational and outdoor experiences to supplement what currently exist. We recognize that the open space parcel that's south of Costa del Sol, and I'll walk you through each of these geographies in a minute, really is a generational opportunity for the community to envision what might be an appropriate future use on that parcel. And then finally, we explored some public-private partnerships that would allow amenities at the golf course, the rec facility, and the public space parcel to really provide the city opportunities for revenue generation, but also amenities for the community. And we've provided all of these ideas as a menu of potential future options. The community and the city might decide to do them in a phased manner. They might decide to do them in one go, or they may decide to explore another approach. And I'll start today's discussion with our short-term improvements, and we're referring to that as a 6-year action plan. And that period, the 6 years, has been deliberately chosen because it ties into 2 upcoming municipal budget cycles for the city. So in the first cycle, the 2 to 4 year period, we have looked at improvements and concepts that can be funded through existing operational cash flow. And then the second cycle, which is years 4 through 6, would likely need additional funding, either grant funding or some kind of debt financing to support more elaborate improvements. We'll start the discussion with the areas north of Costa del Sol, which is the existing golf course, including the clubhouse and the maintenance yard and parking. And just to remind ourselves of what currently exists on the ground at that location, we have an existing clubhouse, which is about 5,400 square feet. There is an existing parking lot just south of the clubhouse, which has space for about 150, 160 cars. At a lower level, just alongside the Oso Creek, is the existing maintenance yard that supports back of house uses and activities for the golf course. And what we're looking at as a short-term improvement in the 2 to 4 year range is really addressing a desire that we heard at the previous workshop and at stakeholders for additional community event space that might be available for weddings or other community related activities. And we tried to reconfigure the existing golf course at least in this early phase, in the least disruptive manner. So what you'll see on the screen, and I'll walk you through, is the existing 18-hole golf course remains as is. Hole 10T is relocated from its current location just south of the existing pond to a location north. The land area that becomes available by that relocation could likely be programmed as future event space, both outdoor and via a temporary structure as an enclosed, sheltered event space. This temporary structure would provide the supporting functions that are required for events like restrooms, catering facilities, and the like. If an event space program is included on the golf course side, it is likely that it will also have a parking requirement. So we also studied at what options are available to provide additional parking at the maintenance yard. This idea does not make any changes to the upper level parking lot, which remains at the 150 spaces or so. But via restriping and reconfiguration of the maintenance yard, keeping the cart barn intact and the maintenance shed, we're able to provide about 30 dedicated spaces for employees and an additional 20 spaces for tandem valet parking. Valet parking is likely going to be, at least in the short term, one option available to maximize the parking. When we talk about improvements on the south side of Costa del Sol, there might be other parking options available at the rec facility. But in the short term, in the 2 to 4 year cycle, the parking is likely going to be valet with the reconfiguration of the maintenance yard. Everything else stays as is. The clubhouse stays as is. The upper level parking stays as is. Only hole 10 is partially reconfigured, and the maintenance yard is partially reconfigured. Also, in this 2 to 4 year period, the Oso Creek Trail, which exists south of Costa del Sol, is likely going to extend north, and that'll be possible via a pedestrian crossing across Costa del Sol. And I'll pause here because I'm sure people have questions and just feedback on the reconfiguration in the short term. Again, 2 to 4 year period with marginal layout reconfigurations to accommodate a program that we've heard is desired by the community.
Great, thank you, Gaurav. So we'll pause. I see a couple of questions in the chat, and we'll make sure to respond to those here. Someone noted that parking is an issue, and it's something, as Gaurav mentioned, we heard before with overflow parking. And then Robin asked if we'd be able to, just maybe, Gaurav, as we're on this discussion, if we can show the proposed changes again.
Sure, it's up on the screen now.
Great. So just as people are thinking through any questions that you have here. And then I do have, I see a question here about duplicating what exists at the community center. And so I'm not sure if someone from the project team or city staff can share what might be the difference between what these proposed changes would have compared to what already exists at the community center. And I'm guessing relating to outdoor events, the outdoor event area.
This is Keith, Assistant City Manager. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. What's available at the community center is actually quite a bit different. There's no kitchen at the community center, so no food can be made on site there. So that would be one distinct difference. And then, you know, it's really the only space we currently have in Mission Viejo other than the Arroyo Trabuco that can be used for weddings. And this would create an additional opportunity for people to host not only weddings, but other events down the road. And even what can't be done at the community center that can be done at Oso Creek is golf tournaments. That's probably the number one thing we get requested for. And those usually have 150, 200 people on site after a golf event. And so you need to have a place to accommodate them for a lunch or an early dinner or something like that. So I think that's the best way to answer that question.
Great, thank you, Keith, for sharing. I see a couple other questions in here, and just for folks to note, we'll be doing questions through the chat as well. for this evening. And so I see a few questions coming through the chat. I see a question here, Gaurav, for the temporary outdoor event area. You have a couple of pictures of tents. Would those tents stay all the time, or would they be just for events?
It could be either or something else. So that the tent image is just a representative image of what might be placed for an outdoor event, but that structure could be more permanent. It could be designed to be more in line with the design sensibilities of the community, or it could just remain an open space parcel. And the feedback I think that the community provides tonight is really going to help shape that.
Okay, great. And then a question about parking. Is there an opportunity to add parking south of Costa del Sol Road with access to the Gulf via tunnel?
Yes, so we're going to discuss this next. And you will see how there's additional parking potentially provided south of Costa del Sol. I don't know whether we've addressed the tunnel question, but we'll talk about it when we get to it.
Okay, and I'm sure this will be brought up in the longer term discussion too, but are there immediate plans to include bathrooms for the golf course in the front and back lines?
I can talk about the 2 to 4 year horizon and then maybe defer to city staff on the current immediate plan. So if a temporary event space is built at the reconfigured Hole 10T, yes, then there would be new restrooms available. But I'll maybe let someone from the city address the current plans.
Yeah, I would like to address that a little differently. Yeah, there would not be additional restrooms. The current facility has sufficient restrooms. I think the real question is on the golf course, like on the holes that are farther away from the golf course, because that question does come up. It's in our long-term budget. It's not something we have budgeted currently. And during COVID, we were not allowed to have them available anyway. And so now that we're getting closer to being out of COVID, definitely it's something. But again, all the improvements we're making have been technically funded from money that's been generated on the course. And so that's a little bit longer process. But yes, it is definitely on the list to be done.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that update. And I'll just remind folks, we have a lot of information that's going to be coming up in future, the future part of this presentation as well. There might be some questions that are asked here that I saved to be asked a little later in the presentation. And so if you haven't heard your question asked, answered here, we will have it as part of our discussion later on in the process. So there's a question here for the 2 to 4 year improvements where the drop off and pickup for valet would occur. Does this mean changing road configurations in the 2 to 4 year improvements?
So valet drop off and pickup would occur at the front end of the existing clubhouse at the existing parking lot. And the valet parking would be available and one option on the maintenance yard at the lower level. And then when we get to discussing the rec center parking, that is option 2 for additional spillover valet parking.
Great, thank you. And then I see some notes here on the golf course changes being made, if there's changes to be made to the golf course, and whether those changes would be during this 2 to 4 year improvements or further along. And so one question here is, I'm pulling it up here, if the course was going to be shortened with the short-term improvements.
Yeah, so in this version of the 2 to 4 year plan for the golf course reconfiguration, only hole 10 is impacted, and the hole 10T moves to the north side of the existing pond. No other holes in this version are reconfigured. That does change in the 4 to 6 year, and there's one additional hole, but that's in the next phase of the improvements.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to review here to see if there's any additional, again, if there's something I haven't brought up as part of the questions, I think it will be answered further on in the presentation. Okay, so let's continue.
All right. All right, so we're going to stick with discussing improvements at the golf course within the short-term 6-year action plan. But this part of the discussion has to do with cycle 2 of the short-term plan, which is looking at years 4 to 6. And again, to just clarify, years 2 to 4 were funded improvements primarily through operational ongoing cash flow. Years 4 to 6 might require additional funding via grant funding or some kind of debt. What changes in the 4 to 6 year period, as illustrated in this concept, is a reconfiguration of both hole 9 and the previously reconfigured hole 10. And this will occur, one, if when after the temporary event space is up and running, if it's seen to be successful, has demand for and likely a more permanent location. This might be one avenue available to provide that permanent location for the event space. So I'll start on this drawing by describing what happens in what is currently hole 10 and was reconfigured in the 2 to 4 year period. So the relocated hole 10T stays as it was previously relocated to. What used to be the temporary event space is laid out as a new practice area for chipping and putting for golfers. It also accommodates about 10 personal warm-up nets, and the images that you see on the right, the bottom right especially, shows what those practice nets might look like. The existing putting green stays as is. What might change in the vicinity of hole 9 are two things primarily. This option explores the addition of an expansion to the clubhouse, and this would be about a 6,000 square foot footprint that adds on to the existing 5,400 square foot of the existing clubhouse, so effectively doubling it in size. Hole 9, which is located in the area that I have my mouse pointed at, is relocated to the north, and the space that is made available is used as the permanent location of future event space. There is a seamless interface between the clubhouse expansion and the outdoor event space because they're at the same level. With this more significant addition, we will talk about parking, but to get to the appropriate square footage of the event space, we did a comparative study of outdoor event spaces that are provided at local golf courses. So we looked at Monarch Beach, the Arroyo Trabuco Golf Course, the Mission Viejo Country Club. And I think what we summarized from that analysis is that the range of outdoor spaces ranges between 13,000 square feet at Monarch Beach to about 3,000 square feet at Mission Viejo Country Club. The space that we've conceptually identified lies generally within that range. We've shown 15,000 square feet. The actual usable space is likely going to be 10,000 square feet. So that represents a middle of the road approach to the amount, to the capacity of that event space. What I will note is that the capacity of that event space is going to be limited and determined largely by the parking available in the future. So to look at potential parking options to support this permanent event space that might get built in the 4 to 6 year cycle, we studied the maintenance yard and explored the addition of a deck, parking deck that sits above the maintenance yard. So all existing back of house maintenance operations would continue at the lower level under the deck, including employee parking. The upper level of the deck would accommodate about 90 additional parking stalls. And those 90 additional parking stalls would have a connection to the clubhouse expansion as well as the new event space, and would also be connected to the upper level parking with a set of stairs, as you see in the image. And I'll pause here again because I know we went through a lot of potential reconfigurations in the 4 to 6 year cycle.
Great, thank you, Gaurav. And maybe it would be helpful to go back to if there's a slide that has, just some questions on here. So there's a few questions here that were asked a little earlier, and I know that a lot of them can be answered. Some of them can be answered in this section here. So there's a question about whether these plans open up possible development on the back end of the course for after 4 to 6 year. And so I guess the question is, do these plans allow for future development after the short-term plan?
Not that we have considered. What is shown on these layouts and plans is the ideas that we've considered today.
Yeah, I don't think we think that there's developable space on the back end of the course. And I'm going closer to Alicia, if that's what you're referring to as the back of the course. Now there's a hillside that we almost abut up to, so we don't think that there's developable space out there.
All right, thank you, Jim and Gaurav. And I do see a couple notes, quite a few notes in here on restrooms, the need for restrooms to be developed and put into place in the short term and within the longer term project as well, on both the front and the back end as well. So just a note, we see your notes in here about the restrooms. And then there's a question in here about, and I don't know if this is the right place to ask it, but on AB 672, and this might be a question for city staff, if California AB 672 will impact this. And we can also save that question for a bit later, but I wanted to let the person know that we do see that question.
Hey, Jenna, there's a question about the 100 acres on the map. I just want to clarify, the 100 acres are both the footprint of the golf course north of Costa del Sol and the public space parcel that's south of Costa del Sol, which we'll get to in a few minutes.
Okay. And I see a question here, have options for the event space to be located on the open space or near the tennis court been considered? So I know we're going to get into that in a little bit, but.
Yeah, we will get to it. And we have more than just event space. There are a whole bunch of different options.
Okay, great. And then a question here about the time for construction for these 2 to 4 year and 4 to 6 year improvements.
Maybe someone from city staff can address that so that it links up to the budget cycle.
Yeah, this is Keith. I would say that, again, it's going to come down to just what monies end up being available when we do a budget cycle. Many other interests compete citywide, and so this would be just one item that would compete. The goal would be that we would be able to accomplish those within the 2-year budget cycle, or the following 2-year budget cycle, hence the 4-year length long-term process. But there's no specific, it has to be this year or next year. That's much more specific than what we've gotten at this point. Our goal is in the next 4 years to accomplish the stuff that you talked about. So that's about as detailed, I think, as we can get.
And Jenna, this is Elaine Lister with the city. I'll jump in on the AB 672 question. I think this is a question to do with housing elements and zoning for the regional housing needs assessment. The city is going through that process. It's got nothing to do with this golf course site. So that's it.
Great. Thank you, Elaine. And thank you, Keith, for your response as well. A couple more questions here before we move on to the next section. One is, are there any plans for a driving range?
Not in the 6-year action plan. We looked at options in the longer term ideas, which we'll discuss later. But I must say those have been very conceptual, but we have discussed it internally. But we can address that more when we look at the long term ideas.
Great. And then another question about the revenues. And Gaurav, will there be discussion on whether there was an evaluation regarding revenues as part of this process?
Maybe Jim can address that.
Yes, there was a discussion and kind of looking at revenues, especially from events and so forth. So we did study that on the front end to look at the potential, and we thought that was where there be potential growth at the actual golf course was an event. From a golf perspective, it's pretty much maxed out at this point unless you raise prices. So we thought that trying to enhance the revenue from events and additional dining experience or hospitality events, we did study that.
Okay, thank you, Jim. I see a couple notes on parking. A note that the parking structure in the maintenance yard, someone appreciates that, and another noted that parking might seem complicated with separate entrances and connections. So Gaurav, just a question on whether congestion or traffic was, to what extent that's taken into account during these 2 to 4 and 4 to 6 year improvements.
So because we're still in a conceptual visioning phase, we haven't gone through the detailed impact analysis. When and if this process does get to detailed schematic design, I mean, all those issues will have to be addressed and resolved. But for now, we're just looking for feedback on the broad concept that we're looking at.
Okay. Great, thank you. So I will, let's see, there's a couple more questions here and then I'll have us move on. A question on parking for this conceptual plan here. When the parking structure is added, is there an approximate number of spaces that would be added as part of that structure?
Yes, so the 1-level deck adds about 90 additional spaces on the deck level, and this supplements the existing 160 or so stalls that currently exist at the upper level and for employees at the maintenance yard level.
Okay, thank you. So I'll have us move on to our next section, noting that we have a few more slides to present, room for more discussion, and that we are tracking your questions here. And then just as a note for folks, the recording of this presentation will be made available, and we have the chat open as well. So Gaurav, back to you.
All right, thank you, Jenna. All right, so the next portion of our discussion shifts south of Costa del Sol, and we're still in the 6-year action plan. So we'll start off the discussion like we did with the other layouts with the 2 to 4 year improvements, potential improvements first. But first, just to summarize and recap the existing conditions of the area that we're looking at. So the rec facility is home to tennis, aquatics, and the YMCA, and has parking generally arranged creek facing, and it's accessed off Costa del Sol, and a pocket is accessed off via Santa Clara. In the 2 to 4 year cycle, the only potential improvements that are being looked at have to do with parking layout and expanding the parking supply. In our conversations with stakeholders, insufficient parking, especially on busy event days and weekends, was one of the most verbalized input we got. And how we're trying to address that in this short-term cycle is by 2 targeted interventions. The first looks at the existing yard that's just off the parking drive aisle when you enter of Costa del Sol. a grading of that pad will likely provide an additional 45 parking stalls right adjacent to the tennis facility. And then further south on this lane that connects the cluster of parking up north to Via Santa Clara, there is the opportunity to expand that existing lane and provide diagonal head-in parking along its entire length, and that provides about an additional 30 parking stalls. So in total, in this short term, by these two interventions, the rec facility parking can add about 75 additional stalls to its current parking, which is about 200 parking stalls currently that they have. Then staying within the 2 to 4 year cycle, but moving across to the east side of the creek, there is an opportunity to provide access and a trailhead parking lot of Casa del Sol on the north side of the open space parcel. What is drawn is about 50 parking stalls in a trailhead configuration, so dirt or decomposed granite. This would provide one, a new access point to Oso Creek Trail, a new trailhead. The parking lot would be designed and configured to also be multi-use. It could serve as parking for food trucks, for example, on days that there might be events along the trail. Other improvements that are considered for this 2 to 4 year cycle are restrooms for sure in the vicinity of that trailhead. And then also a kiosk or cafe at the trailhead. The images on the screen are the Trails Cafe in Griffith Park in Los Angeles. And this is a really successful wilderness cafe nestled in a wilderness park. And it serves as a good model for likely the kind of facility that might provide amenities to trail users, but also announce that this is the start of their Oso Creek adventure. It would be supported by, as I said, restrooms and the trailhead parking. Other potential improvements in the 2 to 4 year cycle are improving the existing trail that connects along Oso Creek all the way down to Geronimo, to pave that, to provide overlooks, to provide signage, benches, associated trail improvements that would make it a better experience and for trail users walking up and down the creek. In this study, we've also identified a potential future use, which would not be determined in the 2 to 4 year cycle, but there is about a 4-acre area available on the north side of the parcel that can be programmed for potential future uses. The images we've shown are conceptual. It could likely be a new pickleball facility. So if the city finds an operator for pickleball, it would have the associated recreational use, but also they have supporting food and beverage. So that might be one option to consider. And then again, I'll stop here and look at the chat box to see if there are any questions.
So far, there aren't questions specifically related to the short-term improvements 2 to 4 year concepts for the rec center area. There's a couple notes on making sure that parking spaces are wide enough, and a question on traffic changes that I think will be discussed in further planning in that part of these.
Yeah, like I can address that right now. So all of that will be required, but that's only when this project goes to a more implementable phase, when there's detailed design and more impact analysis. But at this visioning stage, we're not there yet.
Great, thank you. And then another question on someone noting they are glad to see the cafe idea and asking if there would be the possibility for the community to plant trees along the trail, keeping in mind warmer climates and shade and mental health.
That's a great idea. And I will also respond to the next comment about bicycle posts. Yes, any improvements along the trail would definitely accommodate and provide bicycle amenities, services, bike racks and the like.
Great, thank you. And then someone noting paying attention to noise with different activities that are proposed as part of that. Rob, there's a note here about a creekside trail with a hard surface. And I actually don't know what this is, but testing surfaces that have a high albedo effect.
More reflective. So as we get into detailed design, yes, all of that would be considered by the landscape architect.
But I think we are suggesting that there be both hardscape in terms of, for bicycles, and then also maybe non-hard, dirt or something like that, yeah, as alternatives.
Yes, and we'll get to those additional trails in the next 4 to 6 year cycle.
Great. All right. So I'll pause those questions for the next section here.
Excellent. All right.
So Gaurav, let's move on.
All right. So we're sticking with improvements south of Costa del Sol. This time looking at the second budget cycle. So that's the 4 to 6 year cycle. And we're looking at improvements on the public space parcel. So previously in 2 to 4 years, we talked about the trailhead parking, the trails cafe, restroom, a creekside trail improvement. Improvements in the 4 to 6 year to supplement those improvements would look at providing a diversity of trail experiences on this public space parcel. So in this cycle, what might be considered are additional trails to, for example, one that might hug the contours of the hillside, provide a trail experience that's different and more maybe adventurous than the creekside trail. Look at exercise opportunities, so stair climbs, and you see the images on this slide as what those stairs might look like in a natural trail setting, and those would connect the higher elevation trail to the lower elevation trails. On the west side of the creek, in the 4 to 6 year cycle, the existing trail that currently terminates somewhere in the vicinity of Via Santa Clara might be extended to continue on along the contours and emerge at a new trailhead at the rec center. So in this case, the rec center recreational hub would have a direct interface and access to the more natural recreational open space experiences and amenities that the public space parcel provides. Another idea we've considered, which might have some legs, is organic farming. And given that there are hillsides available on this public space parcel, one could consider finding an organic farmer to operate and utilize the trailhead parking for a farm stand or create events and programming around an organic farming experience. And the images on the screen again show what that might look like in a terraced farmed setting. All right, so just to summarize what we've discussed in this 6 year action plan. So in the 2 to 4 year budget cycle, we looked at improvements at the golf course, and that had to do with accommodating a temporary event space in the least disruptive manner, and hole 10T was the only one that had to be reconfigured. And we also looked at restriping parking stalls at the maintenance yard. On the south side of Costa del Sol, we looked at reconfiguring some of the existing parking to potentially accommodate 75 additional spaces, parking stalls. In the 4 to 6 year cycle, we looked at a more permanent event space at the golf course, and that had to do with reconfiguring hole 9. And then we added golf-related programs such as the warm-up nets and the chipping and putting area to provide golf-related amenities at the golf course. We also provided a permanent outdoor event space of about 10,000 square feet and an expansion of the clubhouse by adding a 6,000 square foot addition. And then on the open space parcel, the idea of the Trails Cafe and all the trail improvements, all within this first 6-year action plan. And I will stop there because the next discussion is going to look at long-term ideas.
Great, thank you, Gaurav. A couple of questions came in, and then I looked back and saw some questions that we still need to read aloud for the group. So there's a couple of questions here on the designs, whether they'll include lighting as part of the trails proposed for walking.
We don't know that yet. I think that's a discussion for when we get to detailed design, and that would then at that time depend on what the needs and expectations of the community are.
Okay, great. And then are the trails proposed multi-purpose, just for biking and walking?
They're multi-purpose. Because we're proposing a set of 3 separate trails in the 4 to 6 year period and beyond, those trails will be available for people of different abilities and expectations. So maybe the Creekside Trail is flatter and more easily accessible, and the Hillside Trail is for people more adventurous.
And then Gaurav, you might have answered this before, but have options for an event space to be located in the open space near the tennis courts been considered in this shorter range conceptual plan?
We have not looked at an event space up near the rec facility, so in the vicinity of the tennis court. We do look at the spaces on the open space parcel that might accommodate events in the future as a long-term idea.
And then there's a couple of questions about revenues. I think we answered it partially, but I just wanted to make sure I answered the full question. So has there been, as part of this section of the study, a study on revenues for golfing compared to other sources in this area? If there are changes made, what the impacts to revenues would be?
I'll defer to Jim.
Maybe that's for Jim.
Yeah. Yes, and we looked at the potential of the golf course in terms of golf associated revenues, and so we have explored that and will continue to do so. So yes, it was examined, from a business standpoint, revenue generation standpoint, what had the most opportunity from a revenue growth potential.
Great, thank you, Jim. A couple more questions, and then I know we have quite a bit more to discuss, and I want to make sure we are honoring everyone's time. So there's a couple notes about ways that the city can partner with other organizations, kudos on the farming, and then also caution on farming, and what it looks like to, what the trails could look like in terms of bridges or where they'll connect to as well. So I just want to let folks know that we see those questions in here as well. And let me see if there's anything that I'm missing for this section here. One last question here. For these conceptual plans, has there been discussion about a cost to park at any of the locations discussed?
Sorry, I didn't catch that, Jenna. Can you say that again?
Has there been, as part of these ideas, has there been a consideration of whether there's going to be a cost for parking?
Not in detail, but maybe Jim can address that, but there will be a future cost. The detailed cost analysis will ultimately be what the preferred design is that this community adopts. So we're not there yet.
Yeah, I mean, I thought they were asking if there's going to be like a cost for using parking.
Oh, sorry.
And I, you know, we haven't got that far, but
Yeah.
my current assumption, and it is not currently, there is not a charge for parking, which kind of reflects, you know, the current parking areas around there.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Gaurav. And our last question before we go on, does this short-term plan include a bridge over the creek?
Yes, and you will see that in just a few minutes.
Okay, great. So on that note, let us move on to the next section here.
All right. All right, so now we are outside of the specificity of the short-term action plan that looked at the next 6 years. And now we are more conceptual, more higher level, and looking at potential ideas that the community might consider to include in the long term. Before I start on that, I just want to clarify again that all of these are just concepts and ideas. None of them is an actual proposal. For any of these ideas to move forward, there will be required additional analysis, community outreach, detailed design, and this is a vision plan, so we're not going to that level of detail. We also recognize that the 100 acres that we're looking at is in the midst of a residential community, and the considerations of that community and the neighbors will determine and shape what ultimately gets programmed and accommodated in the long term on these 100 acres. All right, so let me go right into it. So the first, again, we look at long-term ideas for the golf course north of Casa del Sol. And this is an idea that has to do with a hotel. We have heard from stakeholders on the need for a hotel to accommodate overnight visitors, especially as it relates to the rec facility on the south side of Casa del Sol. If and when an event space is added potentially to the golf course, it provides an opportunity to rethink this area of the plan as a hospitality hub and accommodate a appropriately scaled boutique hotel that in this drawing conceptually shows its development on and over the maintenance yard. So there will be parking under maintenance uses and back of house uses on the at the lower grade, but the hotel itself would interface and be accessed directly from the redesigned upper level with the plaza. The images that you see on the screen are the kind of scale and hotel type that would be appropriate at this location. In conjunction with a significant design intervention like this, there is also then the opportunity to rethink how the Oso Creek Trail crosses Casa del Sol. So one idea that we're considering is creating a new bridge connection over Casa del Sol, so it separates trail pedestrian users from the vehicular traffic that occurs along Casa del Sol. So the images that you see on the screen are the kind of bridges that might be appropriate and reflect the design sensibility of the community and provide a safe, convenient, and separated way for Oso Creek users to continue on both north and south of Casa del Sol. Switching now to the south side of Casa del Sol and looking at the existing parking areas that serve the recreational amenities. Here again is an alternative option for a potential hotel that would occupy the parking footprint that is currently a surface lot, and this would be a hillside, creek-facing, low-scale boutique hotel that provides a overnight visitors an option to spend the night close to where, in case they're here for a sporting event, to satisfy that need. The hotel, either at this location or at the location north of Casa del Sol, would also potentially supplement the new event space that might get programmed into the golf course and might be able to support overnight stays related to events, weddings, other community events. Staying on long-term ideas on the rec facility side, and this is timely because we all know the legacy, the significance that Mission Viejo and the Nadadores in particular have for swimming, both nationally in the country and internationally. One idea to potentially explore is introducing a Olympic grade natatorium, an indoor facility to supplement the existing swimming aquatic facilities at this location. The natatorium would be built and occupy the parcel that is currently occupied by the Y. It would require additional parking because it is a significant intervention, but it creates a facility that in the future might be able to host Olympic trials and other competitions because it now is built to the requirements via a natatorium of for those kinds of facilities. Supporting that more elaborate natatorium intervention might be need for additional athlete overnight stays. So we've looked at one option to introduce stay facilities for athletes who are here for training, for competition. And this might be a cluster of athlete apartments that is accessed off via Santa Clara with views into the creek side. And just to clarify, if these ideas proceed, I mean, they're tied to each other. It makes sense only when there is a significant expansion of the recreational program that makes it a regional and a national draw. I'll stop there and see if there are any questions or comments about these long-term ideas.
So Gaurav, I'll start with a couple of people asked if we know at this point with these ideas how many rooms the hotels would have.
So we've looked at 50 keys rooms per floor, which takes us in the 100 to 150 key hotel. For boutique hotels, there is a threshold below which they're not feasible. And maybe Jim can talk more about that, but we've not done the detailed economic analysis really. These are just rules of thumb.
Yeah, we want to do more of a boutique hotel or housing, and we have to do it in more detail, but that's kind of where we started in terms of sizing. It would be a fairly small location.
And then for the, in terms of the hotel, there was, I think on the map, a note that the hotel would be where the parking area is. And so I just wanted to ask about the interplay between an idea for a hotel and future parking.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. So if, sorry, let me go back. For an idea like this to work with a new hotel occupying the existing surface parking lot, we would have to look at potentially structured parking addition to the parking supply of the rec facility. So which we've shown as potentially a footprint that's accessed off via Santa Clara. But you're right, there will be parking impacts that will need to be addressed via this intervention.
Great. And then another note about locations for hotels in other parts of the city. And then a question on the natatorium. Would that concept be replacing the YMCA? And then also, could there a note that it might be potentially in conflict with what Long Beach is doing with the Olympic swimming pool?
Okay.
Okay, a couple other notes coming in on structured parking and whether that would be a good idea for this area. A note on housing for athletes or temporary housing, and whether or not that's something the city should pursue. And a note on, pardon me, on the cost and interruption to neighborhoods for hotel space in the area. So thank you everyone for your comments here. Any other questions for the long-term ideas for the recreational center here? And we'll move on to the next section.
Okay.
There's a question here of whether we're discussing ideas, thoughts on a shopping center about the YMCA, and I just want to confirm that would be outside of the vision plan area.
Yeah, that has not been considered or looked at. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then one other question before we move on, Gaurav. There's been a lot of questions about restrooms for the golf course. Are there long-term ideas for restrooms, or is that something covered earlier?
I think Keith had addressed the golf course restroom question. I can talk about the southern parcel. So even for the 6-year action plan, we recognize that for and associated with the new Trails Cafe and that trailhead, there needs to be a restroom amenity for trail users. So yes. And then for the longer term ideas, I mean, that's more as per the needs of the facilities that are designed and developed, they will have the appropriate amount of supporting services like restrooms.
And then I have a question on the trail that I'm going to save until your next section here.
All right. All right. So we are continuing to talk about long-term ideas, and we are now looking at the public space parcel that's on the east bank of the creek south of Casa del Sol. So we've already looked and discussed at the trailhead parking, the new system of trails that might get developed. We looked specifically at the creek, and the creek itself represents an opportunity for providing better access to the water's edge, for providing visual amenities. So the images that you see on the screen help towards that end. So addressing water quality through waterfalls and aeration structures, informational panels, dams, things that we can do to provide, one, the sound of water along the creek and different varieties, to provide areas of calmer water, running water, and just to diversify the amount of experiences that one can experience as trail users are walking along a new, improved creekside trail. Someone had a question about bridges earlier. So yes, in the long term, adding a bridge to connect the improved trails that are on the east side of the creek, to connect them to the west trail, and therefore provide a direct linkage between the hub of activity at the rec facilities to the new amenities and experiences that the trail system will provide, would be achieved by a bridge connection. And there might be 2 bridge locations. So one on the north side to connect directly the rec facility and trailhead, and then on the south side, which we'll get to in a minute, would be potentially another bridge location. And then I had referred to this 4-acre programmable area that we had not really programmed in the short 6-year action plan. But there are a range of ideas to consider, and some of them tie in with the adventurous recreational aspect that this open space parcel can provide. So some of the images that you see on the screen have to do with the idea of an adventure park. So mountain biking, climbing, zip lines. There are a whole range of outdoor active activities that are not currently available in the immediate local vicinity. Or conversely, something that lines up more with the natural setting more quiet, more contemplative. So the idea of a botanical garden that has potentially an educational component, a sculpture garden, and utilizing those kinds of spaces to supplement the event space that's on the north side of Costa del Sol, potentially. So this goes back to a question that someone had previously asked, whether this parcel can provide those kind of uses. So yes, and they might be independent or they might be related to what's happening on the north side of Costa del Sol. Or additionally, to have a more wellness related programs. So that's quiet, that has to do with spas, yoga, wellness gardens, and this setting nestled in between two hillsides, a 4-acre flat parcel available could provide that kind of program pretty easily. And then another idea to consider for the same parcel is something more active, more family oriented, that has to do with entertainment, with food, beverage, both for adults and kids. So the images that you see on the screen are from the Malibu Cafe, which is a very similar location. It's located along a creek. It has been programmed to provide a range of entertainment, recreational, and hospitality, food, beverage amenities, and is very successful. This location might be very appropriate for this kind of use in the future. We had referred to pickleball earlier. Pickleball is becoming very popular. There are operators who are seeking locations, spaces to provide pickleball courts to the community. This might be one of those places, and it might be a good program to add on and supplement with this kind of idea, which is the family-oriented entertainment recreation program. This is an idea that is long-term, which is builds on the idea that this location might become a destination for recreational amenities that are not available in the broader extended region. So along those lines, something like a surf park, which might provide that kind of amenity and use to the community and the larger region. Again, I just want to clarify, these are all ideas for feedback. It is likely that some of these ideas may not move forward, but just we are presenting them to hear what the community has to say about these ideas. And then moving to the south side of the open space parcel, so closer to Geronimo Road, there is in this case, on the west bank of the creek, about a 2-acre area that can be programmed for future uses. What makes this location different from the north side is that it is inaccessible to parking. So the closest parking lot to this location would be at the rec facility, which is about half a mile north or half a mile south on the other side of Geronimo. So however we decide on programming this location, it needs to acknowledge that lack of direct parking access. And likely the program will build on its isolation to provide a more discovery-oriented program. So what you see on the screen is a children's wilderness play area. So it's accessible only via trails, and it is programmed and provides places, experiences that instill a sense of discovery for children, and that's what it becomes. Associated with the idea of wilderness children's only is a one-of-a-kind playground. So again, a children's related activity, but providing a playground that is non-typical, that relies on its isolation, its hidden characteristics, and that's the kind of places that children would experience and discover. Or on the flip side, something that's programmed more for grown-ups and adults, but again, relies on its seclusion and isolation. So in this case, the idea of a meditation garden, so a 2-acre meditation garden, drawing on some of the programs that we discussed earlier that had to do with spas and yoga and wellness, but in this case, even more emphasizing its isolation from its context. And I will stop there to see questions and comments.
Yes, so we have a few questions and comments in the chat. I'll start with a couple comments. Someone mentioned enjoying the waterfall idea and converting the dry creek to be able to hear the sounds of water. A question on the flow, whether there is enough water there, where the flow would come from. A note about that the creek bed and trails should be reserved for passive use, not active uses. So I do have a question about the creek and its minimal flow and how that can be corrected for having more water-focused activities for passive use.
Well, I think, go ahead, Carl.
No, Jim, go ahead.
Well, I think we would have to supplement that. There is not really a natural flow beyond runoffs from the neighborhoods. So that would have to be supplemented. And I don't think we're saying have active uses on it, be more passive uses on the water. So it's more aesthetic and there wouldn't be boating or swimming in that, at least as we turn and envision it. But that's kind of what we're looking at right now.
Great, thank you. There's a couple notes here on whether the city has considered a nature center, an interactive nature center, and a note that the creek provides a habitat for all types of wild animals, birds, native trees, and seeing that continue. There's a couple notes of folks not wanting to see food and beverage. A note here on a kid-friendly bicycle pump track. So including those opportunities for kids to have a pump track as part of this as well. And then a couple notes about the passive open space concept being appreciated as part of this. I do want to note before we move on, we see the notes in here about restrooms at the golf course. It is noted the city staff is here and sees those, and so that's something we just want to acknowledge as part of this, that those comments are noted. There's a question here about bridges at the golf course and for flooding, and so I know this is discussing the open space portion, the public space portion, but just wanted to ask whether or not there are bridges proposed at the golf course.
Not at the. Sorry, go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, let me respond. Yes, there are in the current fiscal year budget, there is money budgeted to hopefully replace one, to do a study on all the bridges, and then hopefully we'll be able to at least do one right now. We're still figuring out which one that is, but based on which one is in the worst shape. But yes, we're working on a plan to put that together, but it is a long-term, much like everything else. But yes, it is being addressed.
And then we had a couple questions on traffic impacts and just in terms of these long-term ideas and whether they will have impacts on roads adjacent to the public space. And I'm guessing the answer might be that will be viewed in the future, but just wanted to note that we see the question on
we have noted it,
impacts.
yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we.
Great.
Okay.
We have time for maybe one more question. Just want to see if there's anything that I've missed here, or Gaurav, if anything pops for you in the chat here that you that you'd like to note.
No, I see the note about a nature center interactive. Yes, so it belongs in the broad category of botanical garden, more passive, nature-oriented future programs that might be considered. So that would be something definitely to look at.
All right, and I just want to thank everyone. We have so many questions and comments in the chat, and we're responding to them here, but just to let folks know, city staff is listening, and we will be providing a summary of this as well. So I just want to thank everyone for the robust discussion and the robust questions here. I do see there a note here that there's been warm reception to the improvements already done at the golf course. The city has covered, and I think we covered that in the last workshop as well. And someone had mentioned the volunteer opportunities, both in the future for the sites, and then also in looking at what can be ideas for passive use and the nature, the natural elements of that space as well, and providing opportunities for families and volunteers to be involved. All right, let's move on.
All right, we have one concluding slide before I'm going to hand it back to you, Jenna. So just to summarize what we've discussed and shared this evening, we looked at the entirety of the about 100 acres of plan area that includes both the golf course on the north side of Casa del Sol and the rec facility and the public space parcel on the south side. And we looked at them through two lenses. We looked at a 6-year action plan for short-term improvements, and then we looked at a spectrum of potential ideas long-term beyond 6 years and further on what might be appropriate for both golf course side and open space parcel and rec facility side. So with that, I'm going to stop and hand it back to Jenna.
Great, thank you, Gaurav. I wanted everyone to know here that your insights will be used by the project team to inform the development of the Oso Creek Golf Course and Public Space Vision Plan. And Gaurav, before we move on, I do see one note here, and I realize I did not ask it. Is there an extension of the walking trail to the lake as part of the short-term or long-term ideas?
Not considered in the short-term ideas, but definitely to be considered in the long-term ideas after it's gone through the appropriate feasibility analysis and other technical studies.
Right, thank you. And again, thank you everyone for your insights and comments tonight. I'm gonna have us go to the next slide here. So our next steps, the project team will be bringing the draft plan to Planning Commission and City Council in fall 2021, and then packaging the final vision plan in fall 2021 as well. And
Jenna, if I could jump in real quick.
Yeah.
Just let everybody know, as convenient and informative as these online workshops are, both the Planning Commission meeting and City Council meeting subsequently will be in-person meetings at council chambers. So everyone that wants to attend and actually be heard will have an opportunity to do so at those meetings.
Great, thank you, Larry. And I do want to note, as Larry mentioned, as we're moving into the end of this workshop here, we are really glad that you could join us virtually, and we're really glad too that if you do want to join in person for Planning Commission and City Council meetings as well. All right, if we can go to the next slide here, we have contact information for the project, and want to let folks know that you can email, you can call, and there will be more information posted. Again, this workshop is being recorded. You can also view the live recording later. We'll have a summary and a transcript of the chat as well. So on that, I want to thank everyone for your engagement tonight, for your input tonight and your perspectives. We will leave this the presentation on just for a couple of minutes. If there's things in the chat that you missed that you wanted to take a look at, we'll hang out for just a minute here, but we want to, again, thank you so much for joining us this evening and sharing your time with us. And with that, we'll say good night.